Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Accelerate stage. Thanks again for taking some time out of a very busy IBTM schedule to be with us today. For those that have been on the Accelerate stage before, just switch off for about 10 seconds because I'm going to remind everyone what we're doing here on Accelerate, which is essentially, this is all about tech for good. That's our theme over the 3 days, tech for good. Tech that makes events better, that makes the world a better place. We've taken on the theme of now, near, and next. Now is today's theme, which is all about the tech that's around us right now and how we can make the most of it. Then we've got near, which is the near future. That's tomorrow, all day tomorrow, we're looking at near. And then if you want to have some fun and start really looking into the future, that's next, which is on Thursday, and we're going to do a whole stream of content there. So what I'd advise you to do is come to as many sessions as you can so you can enjoy the whole film, so to speak. But obviously you have busy lives to go out and look over in the show. These are all available on YouTube afterwards, and I really encourage you to download and maybe have a look at what we're saying here. I'm really, really delighted to have Bruce Roche join us for his session. I've known the Live Group for a very long time. They're an incredible agency. They do some fantastic work all around the world. And when I was asked to look at the Accelerate stage, they were kind of call number one in terms of looking at technology. But also what I was really keen to do is look at technology for good as well. And they're perfect people. Bruce is going to speak today, but also the Live Group are back on tomorrow as well. So see, again, this is part of a meal, perhaps the starter today, the main course tomorrow. And again, Live Group will take you through what that's all going to look like. But in the meantime, please give a ripple of applause as Bruce Roche comes to the stage. Thank you, Bruce.
I've never been described as an appetizer before, so that's an interesting start. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Bruce, as Al so warmly introduced me. My name is, well, my title is Head of Audience at Live Group, and really it's my job to understand the people that come to our events, what makes them tick, and ultimately how to get the very best out of them. And I guess linking into Al's theme of tech for good, I'm going to be talking mainly about something that I think can be used for a lot of ill, which is data, and how it's analyzed, interpreted, and used in the context of the events that we attend and run, and all that wonderful things. But on the topic specifically of data for good, I will now give Yuri my eye of show the Slido slide, which is my favorite slide. So there will probably be a microphone handed out at the end, but I know that's not suitable for everyone, and a lot of people just like asking questions through Slido. So I'd really encourage you, if you want to ask a question, please use Slido, and so we don't have one or two people dominating a microphone at the end. And then I'll give Yuri a nice thumbs up, and he sends me back magically to my slides. So in terms of why I want to give you a sense of why you should and maybe shouldn't trust me. I think in the data sciences, we have this idea of telling people any conflicts of interests we may have, and I think that's a good habit that all speakers should get into. So here are mine. In terms of why you shouldn't trust me, if you were to listen to everything I say to you and perhaps have an eye on, there may be a different interpretation of this, I don't wish to blow anyone's mind, but I am both white and male. That gives me a limited perspective on a lot of the topics that I'm going to be talking about. I also come from a rather privileged background. I'm state educated, but from a very good state school, and all of those serve to give me a somewhat narrowed perspective on the things that I'm talking about. I do try and talk to a lot of people in wider fields. However, in terms of why you may want to take some of the things I say with a grain of salt, I would definitely point that out. The second thing is that I work for an agency. Live Group is an events agency. We're full service. Obviously, you may think then the things I talk about may be seen through that lens, and that's quite right. There are things that I have not considered because of that. On a positive, though, why you should hopefully trust me is I spend a lot of time looking at this. I'm hugely passionate about it. I often get into fist fights with our marketing department about just getting these things in the wider world and shared with people as opposed to kind of locking them behind a marketing spiel or anything like that. And ultimately, it's because I believe that this work matters, and it matters much more than people appreciate. Giving a sense of who my family are. I never used to do this, but I've started doing it recently. Every year we do a Christmas card, and it's always a little weirdly themed. This year was Admirals of the deck, and so there's me. That's not the laser pointer. There's me, my wife, my daughter, and my dog. And this is actually quite a useful précis to talk about how different our perspectives on events may be, because it links into the data piece that I'm going to be talking about in a second. First is that I'm quite an extrovert. I'm quite happy talking on a stage and walking you through this presentation. I have good recollection. I excelled academically at school. I was always quite comfortable in a school environment. My wife has ADHD, and it was ADHD that was only diagnosed later in life. She struggled incredibly hard through school. She hates events. She hates attending them. She hates the noise. She hates the way that they are structured, and it gives her a very slimline view on who they are. My daughter, big fan of events, likes really loud noises, and events are really good for that. But she has a friend who really doesn't like loud noises, and so our two families come together, and we have to try and pick around the events that we can attend, even though they're for children. I've yet to ask the dog's opinion on events, but she will probably really like them. I'm just going to dive into the learnings, because why else are we here? We need to start learning these findings and applying them. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is a data set that's been analyzed and collected over the past 24 months, with more of an emphasis on the past 12. And so each of the key takeaways I'm going to walk you through should be seen within that context. The first is this idea of location as a preference. And in a hybrid world, we need to bear this in mind more than anything else. Now, in all the charts and graphs I'm going to use in this presentation, I have just simplified them for the sake of ease, just because numbers flying around is not overly useful. I'll explain them each in turn, but if you want a copy of the slides at the end, that's no problem. I can provide that. Or if you're a real nerd and you want a copy of the raw data, let me know, and I can provide that as well. But within this context, in this pie chart, the black circle is a preference for digital events, and the white circle, part of the circle, is a preference for physical events. And what we mean here is either a person who is happy arriving at a venue, or a person that is happy to watch online. And initially, we dealt with a theory that if you had a physical preference for an event, that would be intrinsic to you as a person. You either really like coming to venues or you don't. But these three graphs were generated from the same audience cohort over the same event series. And so in principle, the difference between them should be minuscule. But actually, in the first set of data, we saw there was a dramatic desire for a digital event or digital delegations. In the second, it leaned much more towards physical. And then the third, we kind of edged more on a half and half. Now, when you consider the time, this first circle was near the time of that second lockdown in the UK at the start of 2021. And so there was a lot more fear and uncertainty around how people were attending events and how they would interact with them. That swung back as we came out of that second COVID wave, and then we've sort of normalized. However, the key thing that people relate to us is that their ability to attend an event is a core aspect of choice for them. And so if you're planning an event and you're not considering a digital delegation as a core part of that, you're probably missing out on kind of unlocking the best in your audience and unlocking their good feelings about your event. Because even if you say, well, we think most people want to come physically, that may be true at that moment in time, but that may not be true forever. And so by enabling people's choice, you're going to give them a better sense of what they can do with your event in the future. Leaders as a cohort, CEOs, senior management, the people that run companies, are weird people when you begin to really examine the data on them. Now, the top bar here is the data set that I have analyzed for what is now over 1,000 CEOs and senior leaders. And the bottom is the baseline data. So linking in from the previous point, in this chart, the black is physical preference. And there's just an enormous predilection. If you are someone who runs a company, if you are someone who powers the management of a company, you want to be in a place physically. That's just 90%, over 90% for the vast majority of people we've profiled. And so we construct events for these people around a physical presence. That's not true for most people, although there is obviously a slightly bigger lean towards physical generally. But it's this left-hand graph that's a lot more interesting and exciting in my view. So when we look at profiling audiences at the events that Live Group runs, we look at 4 main content drivers. The first is knowledge, and so a knowledge content driver is much like this talk you're having now. It's someone who hopefully knows something about something, teaching you all about it. We have experience, which is the ability to have a memory made that you cannot get elsewhere. And when you look at the world of experiential events, you see experience as a core driver. We have social as a core driver, which is the ability to interact and talk with people, and ultimately the people that put an event as a key point in their social calendar. And then finally, we have recognition. Now, this is referred to sometimes in award ceremonies and things like that, but it is also learning through storytelling as opposed to hard facts and figures. And leaders as a cohort dramatically favor recognition as a driver motivator, and only secondary to that do they have this idea of experience. And so when we've looked at building events around leaders, our core principles have to be, number one, are we providing an experience that they will remember, which is actually quite a hard thing for people that typically at the higher end of wage brackets and have typically gone to a lot of events. And number two is, in terms of the way that we structure the content that they ingest, are we telling it as a story? And that means that you can't necessarily just go by the wayside and just hope things work well for the leadership groups that you're trying to talk to. And so when we consider most events, they're typically structured around learner-based content. And if you're trying to apply that mold to a leadership group, you will not strike gold. You will not unlock that audience. And so treat leaders as this weird group of aliens, because from a data perspective, they kind of are. This links into the photo, the digital photo I showed before of my family. And if I could have everyone in this room remember one thing from this, it would actually probably be this finding. And so what we see here on the left-hand side is an event structure. The black bits are areas of activity, listening to a talk, taking part in networking, being part of a breakout or a workshop. And the white parts are moments of break, coffee, chill out, lunch, essentially unstructured time. And this group on the left is what happens when you take a group of extroverts and you take a group of events that are organized around very extroverted, very outgoing people, and you chart enough of them over time, which is what explains the slight blurry lines that you see in the graph. But we see quite a familiar structure. We see your morning session, a coffee break, a bit more morning work, big lunch break, one session after lunch, final break, and then final sessions, and then home. So far, fairly standard. What gets really exciting to me is when you think about both introverts and other neurodiverse individuals. I don't necessarily want to paint introversion as a point of neurodiversion, because obviously we need to talk about people on the spectrum, people with ADHD, but when you begin to both look at events that have been built around them and ask them personally, in a survey way, what would a really good event feel like for you? You begin to see the vast difference in breaks and how it's structured. Very short periods of engagement, break time. Another period of engagement, another break. And actually understanding that your attention economy is so much smaller than you may have thought. But what we're seeing is when we're looking at this, and certainly when we've spoken to some clients about it, well, the response has been, but that's an awful lot of time where they're not doing anything. Which is missing the point that there are people out there who need breaks to process. They need time to reflect and reconcile themselves before going into an event all anew. And so understanding that a single event cannot necessarily be all things to all people. And in terms of what we can do in the future to make events better and more inclusive for all, we may have to think about how we structure them and how we offer delegates different choices in different moments, and how we can essentially get to a place where no one needs to be a second-class delegate, but in fact has an event that's structured around them. There's a thing in political science, which some of you may have heard of, which is called the Overton window, which is essentially the window by which policy is made. It's kind of assumed. And so on either side of that, you have the extreme ends of the viewpoint. And I'm going to use an extreme example. You'll have to forgive me for this, but if we talk about gun control in the United Kingdom as opposed to the US, on the far right side, you would have people that believe that anyone should own a gun without a license. And then on the far left-hand side of that, you would say that, okay, well, all guns should be absolutely banned and there should be the most harshest penalties for people that import them. The Overton window is somewhere in the middle, and that's where UK policy is based, which is guns are banned, but with certain exceptions and licenses and regulations that allow them to be owned. Now, what these graphs are showing is areas of common agreement. And the graph on the top is basically how people understand and kind of coalesce around a given idea. And I'm going to use an example that's hot off the press at the moment, which is the return to the office, and how people rate their agreement into how much they either need to return to the office or how much they feel that the office is an exception. So when we look at the far extremes of that, you have people that say, no, you should work everywhere, and then you have the other side, which is, no, unless you're working in the office, you're wasting my time. Those are the extreme ends. And this bell curve is how the population tends to distribute amongst that, whereby there'll be, in principle, relatively few people on the outskirts, and most people will be in the center point. Now, when we look at content and messaging that we can make in order to change people's minds about their views on the office, or if we wanted to take someone who was, no, you have to do your work in the office, and move them into a more central ground position, we can look at the change that we see in those perceived opinions when we do things like video or case study work or mailers. And that's what we're seeing between the top, which is the baseline, and then the middle section, which is, yeah, a few more people are moving into the center, but the change hasn't been that dramatic. And that's not terribly surprising, because that's just lecturing people. It's telling them, read this and formulate opinion and hope it's good. When you do a similar process at an event, something that is innately collaborative, that brings people together to talk around topics, you see a far more dramatic change in the way that opinions are structured. And so this has got me wondering in terms of when we talk to clients about what they can do at their events and how we can structure parts into the agenda, one of the best things that we may wish to consider is that actually we should find areas in organizations where people disagree and make that a central pillar of certain agenda points, because it's something events are really good at making happen. And certainly when it comes to structuring content, allowing for far more debate and discussion and almost closing commentary around talks, around workshops, around everything that happens in an event, because it is truly one of our greatest strengths that not a lot of other media and mediums can duplicate. This is aping into Al's point of what's going to be happening next, begins to show, I think, something that is quite critical on our horizon. And so this graph is the one I showed earlier. It's how most audiences split personality based on our profiling, based on those core content drivers. And that's with the audiences that exist now, which is split amongst many different ages, many different backgrounds, many different cultures. However, when we begin to look at Gen Z and younger, this chart changes dramatically. And we see far less of an interest in recognition and an even greater less of an interest in learning-based content. The big drivers here for this cohort is social and experience, which is actually kind of similar to the leaders in terms of the experience, but the ability to social network and be around other people with similar or sometimes different opinions. Now, this is the cohort that will come to overtake the vast majority of people that attend events and also run events. And so if there's one chart to me that symbolizes the seismic shift that is going to be coming in the industry over the next 10 years, it's this one. And so if you're planning an event, if you're thinking about running an event, you need to start radically considering the people that are going to be attending that event and how you can structure an agenda around drivers that interest and excite them. Because having safe and competent spaces for people to socialize and be comfortable around each other is going to be critical. And then ultimately offering them something that they can't get elsewhere, that is unique to the event experience, is going to be central to that. Because otherwise, they'll just watch it online. They'll digest it in a different way because it's not offering anything pertinent. Music is a great case study for this. I can listen to Spotify beautifully on my home setup, and it's really nice. There's something in the experience that a concert offers, and how can that be duplicated to an event-based environment? That's a really critical question. This is the final point in terms of the learnings, but one that I don't want to get missed, because I think there's always a danger when you present a whole raft of data, which is almost to say, and the data says X, and therefore all the issues and problems and considerations are solved. We don't have to think about it anymore. We looked at the numbers and they showed us the right way. And that's not the case. Data is a real useful tool in terms of projecting forward and also reviewing the past. But ultimately, it's my belief that human ingenuity and creativity still have the ultimate say in what makes for the best possible work in our industry. And this graph on the bottom, we come back to this idea of return to the office and getting people more excited or interested about the ability to come back to the office. And it's a very simple sentiment graph over time. So the y-axis is how keen people are to return, and the x-axis is over time. And this big spike happened not because of any particular great data analysis and not because of necessarily knowing the audience in an incredibly precise way where we could pinpoint the one word that would change their mind. It just came from a weird idea, which in this case was, what if instead of trying to sell the idea of the office, we come up with a video that highlights all the terrible, awful things about being in the office and really slam it down from the awful smells that you can have in the kitchen through to the annoying person that comes to your desk and won't stop talking. That's always me. But by being honest and then linking it with some messaging about, but there are some benefits, and being a bit more fun and tongue-in-cheek about what was possible at the office and how it could be a place of collaboration, we began to see a seismic shift in perception of the office over time. That's not something that you'll find in data. That just comes from being willing to try things and make a mistake and hopefully get to a better place. This is hopefully one of the most interesting links you'll be offered today in QR code form. And it's something that I've spent the last 2 years in my data closet working on. This is our audience profiling tool. This is a link to a system called Audience DNA. It takes 60 seconds to complete. It asks you a few questions, and in return, you get a sense of who you are at an event, what your content drivers are, and what an event that excites you looks like. We've rolled this tool out now for a number of clients and have seen incredibly impactful results and commentary that is all around the fact that people feel finally like an event's been built for them. I would really ask you all just to try it, to tell me what you think of it, to see if it's accurate to you, or actually you think that maybe it's not accounting for a few things. Have a play. I'd just love to get some feedback on that, but we're going to be rolling this out quite aggressively soon. And then finally, if you've ever heard me talk before, you know this is a point that I always make, but it is one that is quite critical. The people in this industry, in my opinion, and it is a very biased opinion, are some of the best people in the world. And they are people that are incredibly caring and incredibly affected by those around them. And that, unfortunately, in this day and age, often goes hand in hand with things like mental illness and struggles that are often kept private. I myself suffer from chronic anxiety, which always surprises people when they meet me, but is something that I only started to get better with once I began to talk about it. And so know that if you're in a bad place, that doesn't last forever, and that there is help around you and people that can help you. And I always feel remiss if I don't take an opportunity to talk about some data, to actually talk about the human side behind it. And so please also take that away. But that's it. We're done. I'm really hoping there's some Slido questions, or I have to stand here awkwardly for the next 5 minutes. So I'm going to stare at Yuri, and he goes, no. He goes, there's no questions, Bruce. Hopefully you did find that interesting. I appreciate, in terms of this topic, it can feel overwhelming and rather a bit more in-depth than it needs to be. but ultimately it's just all about looking at patterns and finding them and using them for hopefully good. So if you do have any questions, I can take them. There's a floating mic, but also there's Slido. Otherwise, I'll just kind of stand here awkwardly for the next few moments. Or you can all go. That's also a valid thing. I'm going to have a water, is what I'm going to do. Oh no, the bottle opener's not working. There we are. This is the problem with Slido, is everyone has to type. How can you support speakers once you have the audience data? It's a very good question. Speakers need support. Don't I know it, standing on this stage all alone. The thing is that once we've done audience profiling on a large enough set of people, it's not just good enough to show people the charts and graphs and expect them to action anything useful because of it. So we present a speaker information pack which breaks down the audience profiles as we've built them for the audience that are attending that event. And we give speakers tactics on how to engage them, on how to get the very most out of them, the types of messaging that will resonate the best, how much they need to be going to the audience for questions in terms of slides and polls, and also key methods of data transfer in terms of would a storytelling approach benefit? Would facts and figures be the best approach? And so that goes to all the speakers that are attending the events that we run, which are backed by tools like Audience DNA. But also then critically, in addition to that, we do one-on-one workshops with them in terms of how can we best understand the messages that you're trying to share and make them real for the audience that are attending. Some events look to change minds. How can this data support this objective? I'd probably come back to that piece on the Overton window. Changing minds is probably the hardest objective that exists in events, unless you're dealing with a real hot button issue, something to the effect of, you know, a given microcosm of climate change where there's a particular chemical that needs to be eradicated or something like that. Changing minds is a notoriously difficult thing to do. It is something that events are very good at, but something that we have to bear in mind. And so ultimately, I would look at the topic that needs to be introduced and then structure an event more in a collaborative-based environment on how that can be discussed. Now, there's two key considerations whenever you're building workshops based around collaboration, and certainly in terms of the data perspective of many different people attending, is that people like to be in groups in different ways, and that some people really like a large group that they can engage with a lot of different ideas. Some people like a small group where they can share thoughts and feelings in a more intimate environment, and therefore we need to introduce the element of trust in breakouts. So you can choose, hey, would you like to be in a big group? Would you like to be in a small group? Would you actually like to maybe work on your own a little bit and then come with a facilitator to talk about your ideas? Now, all of this means more work, but ultimately is the first foundational step to delivering events built around the people that are attending them. Well, with that, Al, oh no. How closely do you work with marketing to making most use of this data? It's really tricky. So this comes to this idea of data being used for ill, and what I think is actually quite a powerful tool in terms of audience profiling. At the moment, we've air-gapped the data we use in terms of who people are and then what their personality profiles are. And therefore, we take the personality profile data and we use that to build the event, but we then exclude the people from a marketing sense. So we're kind of prohibiting the use of doing highly targeted, effective marketing to people in the sense of a Facebook ad or a Google ad where it seems to know you before you know yourself. The reason is that there's a moral quandary there that I think falls outside the remit of what we want to do and who we want to be in the event space. But at the moment, it's about anonymizing the data, creating a very in-depth sense of the audience, but using that to build a better event that is then marketed to those people as opposed to doing highly precise, targeted ads. And with that, Al, we have 30 seconds left on this timer, so I'll gladly hand back over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Bruce, everyone give Bruce a round of applause. Bruce, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
Brilliant. I will let you go back to your show. We're back in 15 minutes with Terry Waller, who's going to take a negative and turn it into a positive. What happens when things go wrong? So do come back for that one. Should be a really, really interesting session. But in the meantime, have a great IBTM, and we will see you soon, hopefully. Thanks again, Bruce.